Hello and welcome to today's lecture on structure function of the respiratory system. Earlier we have discussed about the sources and routes of drug administration, and today we are going to discuss about our respiratory system, that is respiratory system of human beings. Let us first see what are the objective of today's session. Today's session will describe about the components of respiratory system, and you will be able to understand the structure of the respiratory system. Also, you will be able to describe the function of the respiratory system and explain the process of respiration. You will be also able to understand what are our lung volumes and what are the lung capacities. So, let us begin. What does respiratory system comprise of? The respiratory system is also known as pulmonary system. In human beings, respiratory system starts from nostrils, then pharynx, which is a common area where our food and air mixes. Then it goes down to larynx, which is the voice box. Further down it goes to trachea, where only air goes, and then the trachea divides into bronchi, which enters into our lungs in the thoracic cavity. Now, starting from the trachea, there are about 23 divisions of the bronchi, and it ends in a structure called alveoli. We are going to see what all each of these mean. Now, to begin with, first of all, let us understand what is the structure of the respiratory system. In humans, the main organs responsible for breathing, that is our lungs, and within the lungs we have bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli. They are all present in the thoracic cavity. We all know our chest area, and inside the chest area we have the thoracic cavity. Now, thoracic cavity is formed by a rib cage, right? We have chest and there are ribs, small thin bones which comprise the rib cage, and there is a dome shaped structure which is fibrous tissue known as diaphragm. Now, diaphragm is present at the base of the rib cage and it helps in respiratory process. Now, inside the rib cage we have pleural membranes. These are thin, viscous and liquidy membranes which enclose a pair of lungs. And as we know that human body consists of two lungs, one on each side, one is the left and the right side of the body. In the diagram, you can easily identify all the structures which I mentioned, that is nostrils, nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, and one lung on each side of our body, that is the left and the right side of the body. And each lung, it floats in the thoracic cavity. This thoracic cavity which I explained, which comprises of the rib cage, the diaphragm, these two lungs on each side of our body, they float in the thoracic cavity. How? They are surrounded by a thin layer of pleural fluid, which is a fluid lining the pleural membranes, and it helps in lubricating the lungs. By lubrication we means because when we breathe in and breathe out, our lungs expand and contract. So, when the lungs expand and contract, they have to be flexible, they have to be lubricated. So, the pleural fluid which is inside the pleural cavity helps in the lubrication and it facilitates free sliding movement of our lungs. So, both lungs are connected to this tubular structure, that is the trachea, with the help of bronchi. Or if I say let us imagine a tree which is inverted. Okay, a tree has a trunk. Similar to the trunk, there is a trachea. We can imagine the trunk of the tree as our trachea, and just as the tree branches into two branches, then our trachea also branches into two bronchi, and at the end of each main bronchi there are lungs. Okay, left and right lung. So this trachea, which I explained, which is like a trunk of the tree, is a tubular structure, and it is protected by cartilage. These are C-shaped cartilages which prevent the trachea or the tracheal tube from collapsing. So the trachea on one hand has a pharynx which is connected to the nostrils, and on the other hand it divides into two bronchi, each of which lead into two lungs. Okay, now let us see further. In this diagram you can see what I explained, the trachea which has cartilage rings around it. You can see round cartilage rings, C-shaped rings of the cartilage, and this trachea is dividing into two main branches, which is the bronchi, and each bronchi further is dividing into several finer and finer tubes or tubules, you can say, leading to final unit of respiration, which is alveoli. Now the lung which is on our right side has three lobes which are called the right superior, the right middle and the right inferior lobes, while the left lung has only two lobes, which is the left superior and the left inferior. Why? Because the left lung has to adjust heart. Our heart is in the center but tilted towards the left. So now within the lungs, the bronchi divide repeatedly into smaller and smaller tubes which are known as bronchioles, and the thinnest bronchiole is the smallest and is known as the terminal bronchiole. Now you can imagine each bronchi dividing into so many branches and repeatedly branching and getting thinner and thinner into thinner and thinner tubes, and finally forming a network of such tubes is what our lungs mainly comprise of. But now this each terminal bronchiole, as I said, which is the finest, thinnest, smallest tube, comprises of alveolar sacs. Now at the end of each terminal bronchiole is an alveolar sac. What is this alveolar sac? This is a grape like bunch of grape like structure which is consisting of number of alveoli, and this alveoli, as you can see in the picture or in the figure which I have given, they are the final unit of respiration which are covered by number of blood capillaries, and the final exchange of air takes place in the alveoli. Like we have a alveolar sac, which I said is a bunch of grapes consisting of several alveoli which are surrounded by blood capillaries. So what is the function of our respiratory system? The function of our respiratory system is to oxygenate the entire body. So what happens is that the oxygen from outside air enters through our lungs into our blood, and the blood carries the oxygen to various parts of the body when the heart pumps this oxygenated blood to all parts of the body. What is happening in return is that the carbon dioxide which has been collected by the blood from various parts of the body is again given back to the outside air or atmosphere when it is picked up from these blood capillaries back to the alveoli. So you understand, this is a cyclic process where the air entering our body, the lungs take up the air and the alveoli selectively separates the oxygen, gives it to the blood capillaries and in return takes up the carbon dioxide from the blood and gives it to the outside air. All right. So, now let us also try to see and understand how the process of respiration occurs. As we breathe in air, the oxygen molecules, as I said, enter the nostrils and travel downwards through the pharynx and trachea to finally reach the bronchi, and from each bronchus the air then travels into the lungs, into the bronchioles and reaches the alveolar sacs, and each alveolar sac consists of bunches of alveoli which are the final units where the exchange of air takes place. Now, each alveoli has very high surface area and it is surrounded by a network of capillaries that are rich in blood supply. As I explained earlier, the oxygen molecules will travel from alveoli to the RBCs which are present in the blood capillaries, because blood is flowing in these blood capillaries. So, RBCs have selective, they selectively pick up the oxygen molecules, and also there is an exchange of gases that takes place between the alveoli and the blood capillaries. Oxygen molecules are given in and carbon dioxide is taken up and removed during exhalation process. So, this process of giving carbon dioxide up is called exhalation, and taking in of oxygen molecules or respiring in is called inhalation. So, to say each lung consists of millions and trillions of alveoli, and this filling and emptying of air makes these lungs inflate and empty like an elastic structure or a spongy structure or a balloon. Just imagine a sponge, which you must have all seen how a sponge absorbs the water, and when we squeeze the sponge, the water is released from the sponge. Similarly, in our body, the lungs are filled with the air, and when we expire, the lungs squeeze in to give out the air which is in the process of expiration. Now, during the process of respiration, external and internal intercostal muscles which are inside the rib cage, they help in facilitating the process of respiration, because there can be no activity performed without the help of muscles. So, muscles contract and relax inside the rib cage, and also the diaphragm rises and descends during the entire process of respiration. The change of lung volume per unit change in the airway pressure is called the stretchability or compliance of the lung. You understand? Now, try to understand that how much our lung can expand and contract is a property which is little elastic in nature. So, this property is known as the stretchability or compliance of the lung. Now, do you know how much air do we breathe in 1 minute? See, at rest, a normal human breathes 12 to 20 times in a minute. In 1 minute, we breathe in and breathe out about 12 to 20 times. And per breath, which means in each expiration and expiration, 500 ml of air is exchanged. So, you can say about 6 to 8 liters of air per minute is inhaled and exhaled. This is per minute. How much is the requirement of body for water? We say on a daily basis you must consume about 6 to 8 liters of water, but here just see the amount of air which our body takes in and gives out is 6 to 8 liters in only 1 minute. And this process we are doing lifelong, 24/7. So, how much air our body requires? So, in every respiration process, 200 ml of oxygen enters our body and about 200 ml of carbon dioxide is released or expired out. The amount of air that moves into the lungs with each inspiration is called the tidal volume of the lung, and the maximum amount of air that can be expired after deepest inhalation is called the vital capacity of the lungs. Now, see, these are all indicators of how well your lungs are functioning. These parameters are measured to assess how good or bad your lungs are. So, if you go for any pulmonary test, pulmonary function test as we call, you will be given an instrument which is a spirometer, in which you will have to exhale after inhaling in a very deepest manner, and this extra exhalation or the forced exhalation which you do will tell your vital capacity of the lungs. And now, can you guess how much would be the vital capacity of our lungs? See, in women, the vital capacity is about 3 to 4 liters, while in men it is about 4 to 6 liters. So, our lungs can hold 6 to 8 liters of air, and at no time can we totally empty our lungs. Even if we try our level best to keep exhaling, at no time will our lungs be totally devoid of air. There is always some amount of air which is left behind, okay? And even after our deepest exhalation, that is, this air which is left behind is called the residual volume of our lungs. So, this was about the structure and function of our respiratory system. Now, I will just briefly touch upon two types of disorders or impairments, as we can say, which occur mostly when our pulmonary function gets impaired. Now, what are these two types of disorders? These are obstructive and restrictive disorders. So, just remember that when the airways which I explained, that is our bronchi, bronchioles, when their lumen, that is their passage, gets blocked or becomes constricted or blocked by some mucus, or the narrowing of their airway lumen occurs, then the process of respiration, that is inspiration and expiration, becomes very difficult. Especially, it makes it all the more difficult to exhale, to expire the air. In this case, our pulmonary function gets impaired, and this kind of impairment is known as obstructive impairment. There is another type of impairment. There are two types, one is obstructive and the other is restrictive. In restrictive impairment, the overall lung volume gets hampered, it gets decreased. Why? Maybe because you are smoking or you have inhaled such say suspended particulate, the very small, the PM 2.5 and the less than PM 2.5 particles, smoke particles, which will block or clog your smaller airways. When that happens, your entire lung is not functioning properly, and there is a decrease of lung volume, which is actually, say it is about 4 to 6 liters, but if half of your lung gets blocked and if your small airways get choked, then only 50% or 60% is working. So, the total lung volume gets decreased, and there is a decrease in your total lung capacity. The amount of air which your lung was actually able to exchange would not be exchanged. So, this kind of impairment which happens in our lungs is called the restrictive impairment. In present times, obstructive diseases are more commonly seen as they arise from exposure to pollutants or allergens, or in case of smokers. And in case of smokers, the common term for obstructive impairment is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD. So, in obstructive diseases, the lung volume usually remains unaffected, but the flow of air gets reduced due to inflammation or swelling of the walls or blocking of the airways. All right. So, today we have all covered the various components, and now let us revise. We have talked about and understood the respiratory system, what all it comprises of. It comprises of nostrils, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi and alveoli, which is the final unit of respiration. Also, we have studied about, or we have understood the structure of the respiratory system, how our lungs are, what all is there in the lungs. It is like a spongy structure which comprises of smaller and smaller tubes or tubules of bronchi, which get smaller and smaller, and they are termed as bronchioles, and these bronchioles are ultimately ending in alveolar sacs, and these alveolar sacs are nothing but they are bunches of alveoli which resemble a bunch of grapes, and each alveoli is surrounded by blood capillaries, and they help in the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide molecules from outside air to our circulatory system or our blood, which is present in the blood capillaries. So, this was about the structure of the respiratory system. Function also we have understood that the function of respiratory system is to oxygenate the entire body system, the organs present in our body, and to oxygenate our blood. And process of respiration, how the gaseous exchange takes place, also we have understood with the help of air, alveoli and blood capillaries. Also, we have talked about the lung volumes. Today we have understood what is tidal volume, what is residual volume, and what are our lung capacities or vital capacity of the lung. Tidal volume is the volume of air which our lungs can accommodate and can be exchanged on each and every breath. Vital capacity is the total capacity of our lungs, and it varies from men and women, and residual volume is the volume of air which remains in the lungs, which can never, because our lungs can never have zero air. So, there is always, even after the deepest expiration, there is always some amount of air which resides in our lungs, and that is known as the residual volume. So, thank you very much, and in the next session I will be explaining about more into detail about the diseases and disorders of our respiratory system, like for example, what is asthma, how it is happening these days very commonly, what are the various pollution related diseases, what are the smokers diseases, COPD. So, that all we will take up in the next session. Thank you very much.